Okay, so when you mingle with startups and when you think entrepreneurship, I wouldn't say sooner or later because it is sooner. You have to deal with the question of funding. So we wanted to spend the next 40 minutes or so talking about just what we want to do in terms of funding and how we want to influence or instigate it. So I titled this HPC.fund because it turns out .fund is now an actual stem for websites. But because we are trying to address a gap, and I'll tell you what sort of the two components of it are as we move forward. The first one is what I mentioned earlier this morning, is our Champions program. The idea is to select 2 or 3 startups, engage closely with them, and help move them from point A to point B and meet their next milestone. The main reason we want to do this is because as Startup HPC, we should like to demonstrate how we have actually helped startups. Right? This will be a question that is going to be asked of us. Okay, you guys have been great. You've been doing this for 2 or 3 years or 4, 5. Can you tell me a startup that actually benefited from this? Now, some of that we get from the community. Some of that we get from the and kind notes that we get from you, but it would be nice to actually be able to point to, here's 2 or 3 or 4 startups where we were intimately involved with and we really helped them move the needle in some visible way. So that's part of that. The next thing really is towards an HPC fund. I say towards an HPC fund because needless to say, Startup HPC is not a fund. Maybe it can become one in N years, but it isn't right now. In the meantime, there are sources of funding, as our next speaker will review. But what we really want is to instigate an HPC-focused fund. As was discussed earlier, most VCs shy away from the word HPC. They equate it with academic, government, markets that they don't feel present a huge revenue opportunity. They think it's all free systems. They think it's like nobody wants to pay list price. They all want it to be free. They just want to stay away from it. When you add to that any hardware component at all, then you're really completely out because they are extremely scared of doing anything related to hardware. Hardware is just hard. It has supply chain. It has, service issues, logistics, escalation, much, much, much more difficult. So even though we are talking about HPC-inspired startups, not just HPC startups, we nevertheless are can't find 1, 2, 3, 4 VCs that spend a lot of time specifically on HPC. There's one here, there's one there. There are some that go into deep science, but not really this. So we think there's a gap, right? So there is a gap. There's a gap in terms of deep science and early stage. So there are VCs that do deep science, but not as deep as we want to take them with HPC. And they don't really do very early stage. The kind of progress they want to see from you before they fund you is almost like, well, if I had all of that, I wouldn't need funding. If I had 35 customers and if I was in revenue and if I had, this, that, and the other, well, then I'm already bootstrapping my way in. So this becomes a catch-22 with VCs and makes it very, very difficult to get funded. There's history. Clearly, IT plus STEM, which is sort of one way of thinking of HPC, is a very, very interesting area. IT is very interesting. STEM for science, technology, mathematics, etc., is very, very interesting. The combination of the two is really incredibly important. And of course, there is lots and lots of innovations, as Gary was saying in the previous talk. It's hard to put your finger on any deep technology that doesn't trace its roots back into some national lab or HPC lab or et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, there's a big opportunity, as I was saying earlier in the program, that with digitization, the requirement for math and science to be applied to everything is just really huge. I mean, when you talk to your phone, there was a whole bunch of deep learning that happened in the back that was all sorts of computationally intensive stuff. So we think there's an opportunity there. So what you are going to get from us, really, those two things. The Champions program, so that we can point to specific, and then maybe use that as a way of bolstering the idea of funding and releasing it, opening it up for HPC activity. So with that, I will pass it on to our next speaker, or should I introduce her as well?
Yeah, I'll sit down.
Go for it. There. Are you?
No,
Yeah.
you were there.
No.
Sorry, somebody confused me there, Shane. Thank you. Sources of funding for HPC-Inspired Startups. So when Megan's going to talk about that, we'll just make sure we have the laptop all set up and working, which looks like it's going. We hope.
Maybe.
Look at that. Perfect.
Perfect. All right, I'm Meghan McClelland. I'm very interested in HPC. I grew up in HPC, have been involved in it forever, so I'm excited to be here today. Also an angel investor. I joke around with my friends sometimes that I have a hobby of collecting worthless stock certificates. But hopefully they'll end up being something someday. We'll see. But I wanted to talk today about the funding landscape. A lot of people ask me, where can I find funding, or what are the different sources of funding? And so that's what I want to go over today for people who are interested in creating a company. There's a couple of things that you need to have in place first usually, so I wanted to go over these quickly. You really need a great team. Investors invest in teams of people. Individuals will have a very hard time getting later stages of funding. And I see this as particularly important. I think it's been mentioned today to have a great team and to have someone with skills who have the opposite of your skills, so that something you're not good at, they are good at, and together you can cover the whole landscape. And I think that engineers, you need business people, and business people, you need engineers. So there's a lot of the separate skills in those two functions, and to find both of those skills in one person is very rare, and even if you do have all the skills, you aren't going to have the time to do both of those things. So make sure that you have a really great team. You want to have a great market opportunity, and what I mean by this is looking for an addressable market. You probably have multiple ideas, and so it's a smart thing to sit back and look and say, how much spending is there in that market, and how many people are going to buy this kind of thing? And how do I size that? How do I get an idea of that? Well, there are industry analysts who can help you look at those areas. Earl Joseph, who's speaking next, is an excellent resource for HPC for helping. Where is that spending and where are those opportunities? Because you want to make sure that there is an opportunity there for your idea. And a great idea, usually by the time you're talking about creating a business, it usually is a good idea. But make sure that you can mention it to a couple of people and they say, oh yeah, I get that, that's a great idea, that's fantastic, you should totally do that. It solves a pain point. You want to make sure that you have those three things before you go off and look for funding. The main points to walk away with, we'll talk about each of these. There are several different sources of funding, and you should definitely care where your funding comes from. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about finding the right source for your funding. You have a lot of different choices, and it's important to make sure that it's a good fit. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about understanding the fees for the different funding that you find. And legal advice is recommended. I'm very sorry to recommend attorneys, but they can help you set things up in the right way so that you don't have problems later, is what it boils down to. So legal advice is highly recommended. Understanding the fees. Whenever you are getting money from someone, you are always giving up something. And it can be different things, and how you structure that deal is important. You could be giving up equity, which is partial ownership in your company. You could be getting a loan with interest. You could be making a royalty deal where you sell something and a certain amount of the profits from that sale go to the person who lent you money. You could be talking about advisory shares, or you could be talking about conditions. We heard earlier a lot of startups had gotten help from the government. Well, that comes with different strings attached. It could be that you're mandated to have your software be open source. It could be that you have to find matching funding. It depends. What you're giving up depends on the individual deal, how much you need the money, and to a large extent, the ambitions of the person loaning you that money or gifting you that money. It depends in a large part on where you both are. And it's all negotiable. So it's very important for you to make sure that the deal is fair to you, it's fair to them, and make sure that you feel good about it, because you're going to have to live with it for a long time. Accelerators and incubators, I think a lot of people here are past the seed stage, so I'll move quickly through these ones. Accelerators and incubators, typically there is a cash component, but mostly these are structured around organization for office space, help with mail services, building space, professional services such as marketing, things like that. They can help you in the very early stages of your company. They'll offer services like this and help you with that. And they typically include some sort of educational or mentorship component. Because I'm from Portland, a lot of my examples include Portland. So the Jaguar Land Rover incubator is an excellent example of, they're looking for companies that are related to cars. And if you apply to their incubator and get in, you get a certain amount of funding. And oh, by the way, you get to work with Jaguar Land Rover engineers, which is an excellent strategic partnership for your business if you're interested in doing something around vehicles. So find the appropriate accelerator incubator. If I'm working on a peanut butter company, a Jaguar Land Rover incubator probably won't accept my company, first of all. But if I should be so lucky as for them to say, yes, we would love to have your company, it's time for me to sit back and say, why am I here? I have nothing to do with cars. So you want to make sure and find that good fit. Angel funding. Angels are typically individuals. I think a lot of what they have in common is that, number one, they have capital that they want to put to work in early stage companies. And two, I think that they're a lot of times interested in helping, and they're usually well connected. And so finding this individual who wants to help you and invest in your company, they usually invest in very early stage companies. And these can be great people to get on board. You want to look for angels who know your area, who believe in you, and who have connections in your different area. You want an angel who hopefully has invested a couple of times before and can help you with the landscape and what things look like. How do I find these wonderful individuals? Well, it depends on what area you're in. There are famous television shows. Shark Tank started out, Dragon's Den before that. Now there's probably about 10 different spin-offs of television shows of angels if you're interested in that. There's also Angels Online. We'll talk a little bit more about crowdfunding. Also, the Angel Capital Association can be a great resource to find different groups of angels. The Alliance of Angels in Seattle. There are various angel groups in all of the regions. It's got lists of angels. And so start asking around, and you'll be surprised. There are lots of them, and you can find them. The more you ask about it and the more you talk to people, you will find them. A note about, we talked a little bit about individuals and their interests. It really ranges with angels. And so I strongly suggest that you know who you're getting involved with, because there are many different types. So, and it ranges from a person who still works full-time and has a little bit of capital that they want to put to work. Yeah, I want to talk about, a couple of investments on the golf course. This is great. I'm going to invest in a couple of companies, and that's sort of where it stops. There are professional angel investors who that's all they do, and they have very deep pockets. That's all they do. They have amazing networks, and they're doing this full time, and they're there to make money. Some people are there as a philanthropy exercise, and so it depends. Be very clear about their expectations when you get involved with this person, because you're going to be working with this person for a long time. So right up front, this is fiction, but it's my favorite example for anyone who watches this show. It's my favorite example of some of the things that can go wrong investing with the wrong angel investor. So spoiler alert here. Richard is the CEO on the right, and Richard gets invested with the venture capital firm. And first of all, are these venture capitalists that you would want to work with? After watching the show, you might hesitate a little bit. But he gets involved with an angel who ends up through various moves that are to his own benefit, end up getting Richard fired as CEO from his own company. So do not put yourself in that position. Be very aware of the rights that your investors have, no matter who they are, and make sure that you're not going to get in situations like that. And this was also against the advice of some of his other partners and ended up being bad for him. So completely fiction, but I think somewhat based on reality. And so if you haven't seen the show, it can be kind of funny. Venture capital, we talked about some of this morning, and so the difference between venture capital and angel investors, typically venture capitalists are investing someone else's money. Angels are investing their own money, and so venture capitalists are investing someone else's money. They have very strong motivation for big returns. They are looking for a 10x return. They're not going to be shy about telling you that. They're looking for big returns. They're looking for an exit. They're looking for 5 to 7 years. Finding patient venture capital can be a little bit harder. But venture capitalists are also amazingly helpful. They reserve follow-on funding, so if you need more funding down the road, usually they will have it. They reserve capital to maintain their pro rata rights as well. They usually require a board seat, which is a good thing. You'll have a member of the venture capital company on your board helping you, introducing you to people, doing everything they can to help you succeed. They provide expertise and resources. They can recommend people for things that you may need help with. They also have a thorough and extensive due diligence process. This is something that you need to be prepared for. They'll ask a lot of questions, and it's okay to tell them answers. It's okay to give them information. It's okay to say you don't know. It's okay to say this is going to be, that yes, that's something we're thinking about. That's one of our key hires for next term. No, we don't really have fantastic marketing yet, but that's something we're going to do. That's okay. But it is important to be on the same page about where you're going and what you're doing, because again, you're going to be working with these people for a long time if you do decide to take funding from them. We've talked a little bit throughout the day about venture capital and how they feel about HPC. And I just want to echo that I think there are a couple of venture capital firms that are interested in HPC, but I think it's all about how you position your technology. So if you go in and you talk about, let's pretend that I'm Andy Lawrence, if you saw his talk earlier this morning, if you go in and you talk about, oh, I've got this metadata management system and it's got all these widgets and I do all these technical things, and their eyes sort of start to glaze over, and maybe you're lucky enough to get a technical venture capitalist, but even then it will only take you so far. But if you come in and you say, the world of data is exploding, I have data on my iPhone, I can't find what I want, I'm trying to make a picture book of my kids, and guess what? 10 years of pictures are hard to index, it's hard to search, it's hard to find things. It's very different positioning. And so I think if you have someone, especially in marketing, who can help you, or someone, a pitch coach, or someone from a business school, to help you with that positioning of how do I make this sound like this is a technology that lots of companies are going to use, and even think about that, how does your business relate to a technology that's going to be used in thousands of other companies and really help shape the future. Versus we tend to get into the technical goodness of, oh yes, this takes less memory and I can compress this, and there's all these wonderful technical things about it, and you probably will get into that with their diligence team. They have resources who help them with that, but it's not the first thing you want to say. So that positioning is very important with them. Crowdfunding is an up-and-coming new thing. I'm very excited about crowdfunding. I'm very bullish on it. So far, we've talked about a lot of traditional methods of funding. Crowdfunding is funding that comes from multiple individuals. The first example is non-equity crowdfunding. So on the internet, you can post about your company and you can get funding in exchange for early products or a token gift. Usually that's for a consumer products company. So probably not too applicable to those in this room, but I think it gets more exciting when we start talking about equity. So crowdfunding, the Jobs Act came up, and in 2013, Title II came up. So people talk about the Jobs Act. There's actually several different titles in the Jobs Act. But Title II was so that you can advertise deals online. Deals used to really be an inside club. You have to know someone to have heard about it, to have the opportunity to invest. And how does a company in Portland connect with an investor in Florida? Well, you had to know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. And I think that through the internet, that's becoming easier. So deals can be advertised online. Now it's legal. You can advertise it online to accredited investors. They can choose to participate. Here's some examples of it. AngelList, I think, is a notable example. It has an HPC section. So you can look on AngelList. You can see high-performance computing companies, and you can see the individuals and the venture capital firms that invest in HPC companies. So that is an exciting list to have and something that I recommend paying attention to. Non-accredited equity is brand new. It literally started, the Jobs Act, this is the Title III, the Reg CF fundings. These came into action this year. And so it's just getting shaped. What this is anybody can invest in your company, even if they're not accredited. Accreditation is an SEC-defined a term. This is a term that's in the United States. It's an individual who has a certain net worth or a certain income. That's an accredited individual, and it's a regulation that you have to meet. Until May of 2016, unless you met those criteria, you couldn't invest in companies. That's no longer true. Now a company can do a Reg CF raise, and they can get on the internet and they can raise from anybody. It's really fantastic. It's so there's varying opinions on the success of it. Some people sort of wave it away and aren't very excited about it. Like I said, I'm very bullish on it. I think it's bringing in a lot of new funding. I think it's making a lot of super fans. If you have a company that people can really connect to, and you get 300 people involved who say, yes, I'm behind company X, and I'm going to help you with your message and buy your products and be your greatest fan, I think that's a very good thing. Now, why am I talking about this at an HPC conference? Again, it's all about positioning. If you have something that people can resonate with, I do believe that you could raise funding from the crowd. And a great example of this, one of the most successful crowdfunding raises to date, has been a bionic pancreas. And so they went online and said, we have this great technology, it's a bionic pancreas, isn't this wonderful? It may not have succeeded that well, but they had a lot of material about, hey, we make people's lives better. Look at these children who have lived because of our technology. We're in FDA trials. They got a ton of press. They got a PR firm together, and they raised up to the limit. It's $1 million every year. They raised up to the limit, and they're one of the 3 companies to do it so far, which I think is a really fantastic thing. So yes, you see a lot of consumer products. Yes, you see a lot of entertainment type things that people resonate with, but I do think that you could see deep science there. And so I think it's how you position it. There are also loans that you can get. There are many different sources of loans. You can get loans from family and friends. You can get loans from the Small Business Administration. You can get personal home loans, retirement loans, microfinance loans. There's this whole new thing called peer-to-peer loans, where you can get loans from Funding Club and Prosper and things like that. Silicon Valley Bank is an excellent example of some people who really understand entrepreneurs, know entrepreneurs, like to help entrepreneurs and work with them. That can be a great option. My word of caution, never quote-unquote loan more than you can afford to lose. Be very careful, especially when we're talking about your retirement or your house. We all believe in our company and we make these big bets, and that's what entrepreneurs do, but please be very careful about your livelihood and just make sure that what you're doing is you have a backup plan, because I don't want to see those situations go wrong. But getting loans, I think can be a very good thing. Non-dilutive grants, we talked a little bit about government funding. Non-dilutive grants, it's wonderful when you don't have to get up any equity. You could be required to find matching funds like we talked about. And also, bootstrapping can be an option too, and I think that's a very important question to sit back and ask yourself, do I need funding? When you're talking about getting a lot of funding, it's usually because you want to grow fast, because you need to hire people, because you need to build hardware. But there are companies that it's very possible to bootstrap. So I can sell to a couple of customers. I have an early product that I can build fast and sell to customers, and fund myself for a little while, which can be a good option. Expect to hear no a lot. When you're looking for funding, you're going to talk to a lot of different people. You're going to hear no a lot. It doesn't matter. Keep searching, keep looking, keep finding that fit. You're bringing someone an opportunity that they may connect with, and eventually I believe that you will be able to find that person. So keep looking. Expect due diligence. Respond promptly to their due diligence requests, and don't be afraid to talk about those future plans. The level of due diligence will depend on the type of investor. What they want to know about the market, the competition, about you, about your co-founders, about your company. It's going to depend on who's looking. Usually the due diligence will cover all of those things. Don't expect NDAs. It's especially for angels who invest full-time or for venture capital companies, that can be a very difficult request because they're exposed to so many different things, and that people are very careful with their signatures. So that's a little bit shocking for people when they say, I have this great technology, it's so cool, I'll tell you about it as soon as you get an NDA, and a venture capital firm says, no, thanks, pass. It can be an awkward situation, and my recommendation is that you can talk about your company a lot, and you can talk about the market. There are a lot of things that you can talk about before you get into the deep science of where your actual intellectual property is. And you can talk about NDAs when you get further into the road, or sometimes the group, so the Oregon Angel Fund group that I invest with, we have basically an operating agreement that says anything I hear about an oaf stays an oaf, which we affectionately call ourselves. It's a lot of fun, and usually that's good enough for people. But I've seen that be a sticking point with some technology companies, so just thought I would mention it. Another thing, you shouldn't expect, for the funding cycle, you shouldn't expect the due diligence to drown on and on and on. And I think that it's an unfortunate thing that we see sometimes with funding companies that if you have someone who's really stringing you along and wanting a lot of meetings and not making a decision, that's probably not a good sign. That's maybe a sign to look into your funding source. An angel should be able to make a decision relatively quickly. A venture capital firm, I would say a couple of months. If it's dragging on much longer than 4 to 6 months, I would start getting concerned. So there's some average timelines. And stay in touch with your funders. We love to hear about what you're doing. Once you have money, don't just disappear. Keep your funders up to date. Tell them what you're doing. Tell them what you need. Don't only contact them when there's a problem. Give them periodic updates, because people who have funded you love to hear about how you're doing. They're a big fan. They want to see you succeed. They want to help. So stay in touch. And thank you to everyone who's helped me with this presentation, Julianne and John from the Angel Fund, Chris from SVB, and Nathan and Valerie. Funding is out there, and if you look hard enough and search, you will find it. Thank you very much.